My name is Frances Townsend, and at 22 years old, I stood on a university graduation stage in front of 3,000 people while my parents, the very people who had brutally refused to fund my education 4 years earlier because they decided I wasn't worth the financial investment, sat in the front row with their faces completely drained of all color. They had traveled there exclusively to watch my twin sister graduate. They had absolutely no idea that I was even enrolled at the university, let alone attending the ceremony. They certainly didn't expect that I would be the one walking up to the podium to deliver the keynote commencement address to the entire graduating class. But this story doesn't begin on that sunlit graduation stage. It begins 4 years earlier in the suffocating quiet of my parents' living room, on the exact night my father looked me dead in the eyes and said something I would carry like a jagged scar for the rest of my life. To understand the depth of that moment, you have to go back to a humid summer evening in April 2021. The college acceptance letters had arrived on the exact same Tuesday afternoon. My twin sister, Victoria, got into Whitmore University, a prestigious, high society private institution carrying a staggering price tag of $65,000 a year. I got into Eastbrook State, a solid, highly respectable public university, with an annual tuition of $25,000. It was still a significant amount of money, but entirely manageable for a family of my parents' financial standing. That evening, my father called a formal family meeting in the living room. He settled into his heavy leather armchair like a corporate executive addressing a board of skeptical shareholders, adjusting his watch before looking across the room. My mother sat quietly on the sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face entirely unreadable. Victoria stood near the bay window, practically glowing with self-satisfied anticipation, already imagining her elite college life. I sat directly across from my father on the edge of a chair, still tightly clutching my Eastbrook acceptance letter in my cold hands. "Victoria," my father began, his voice booming with clear, unearned pride, "your mother and I have decided that we will be fully funding your 4 years at Whitmore. Tuition, room, board, books, and living expenses, everything will be completely covered." Victoria squealed with delight, rushing over to hug him, while my mother offered a glowing, triumphant smile. Then, my father turned his gaze slowly toward me. The warmth in his eyes instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, businesslike detachment. "Frances, we have decided not to fund your higher education." The words didn't register at first. I sat there paralyzed, feeling the air leave my lungs. I'm sorry," I stammered, thinking I had misheard him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Victoria possesses genuine leadership potential. She networks exceptionally well. She will marry into a good family and build powerful social connections. Funding her education is a clear, logical investment for this family." He paused, and what came next felt like a sharp blade sliding silently between my ribs. "You're smart, Frances, but you're not special. There is simply no return on investment with you." I frantically looked at my mother, begging her with my eyes to say something, anything, to defend me, but she deliberately avoided my gaze, staring intently at the rug. I looked at Victoria, but she was already staring down at her phone, rapidly texting her friends the exciting news about Whitmore. "So? I just have to figure it out myself," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking under the weight of utter humiliation. My father casually shrugged his broad shoulders. "You're resourceful, Frances. You'll manage." That night, alone in my dark bedroom, I didn't shed a single tear. I had already cried enough over the years, over forgotten birthdays, hand-me-down clothes, and being intentionally cropped out of family photographs so Victoria could take center stage. Instead, I sat on my floor in the dark and confronted a brutal truth that changed the entire trajectory of my life. To my own parents, I wasn't a daughter to be loved. I was simply a bad financial investment. But what my father didn't know, and what nobody in my family could have predicted, was that his cruel dismissal would ignite a ferocious, unyielding fire inside my soul. 4 years later, he would be forced to account for those words in front of thousands of witnesses. The truth was, this ruthless favoritism wasn't a sudden development, it was an ugly, pervasive thread woven into the very fabric of our household that everyone pretended not to see. When Victoria and I turned 16, my parents bought her a brand new Honda Civic, complete with a massive red bow taped to the hood for her birthday. I was handed her old, discarded high school laptop, a battered machine with a cracked screen and a dying battery that lasted 40 minutes at best. "We simply can't afford 2 cars right now, Francis," my mother had offered with a fake, apologetic sigh. Yet, they miraculously found the funds for Victoria's annual ski trips, her 1,200 designer prom dress, and an all-expenses-paid summer study abroad program in Spain. Family vacations were an exercise in psychological erasure. Victoria was always assigned her own private, ocean view hotel room, while I was forced to sleep on uncomfortable pull-out couches in hotel hallways, or once, in a converted storage closet that the resort sarcastically labeled a cozy nook. In every formal family portrait hanging in our hallway, Victoria stood dead center, radiant and smiling, while I was pushed to the extreme edge, sometimes partially cut off by the frame like an accidental afterthought. When I finally confronted my mother about the obvious disparity, when I was 17, desperate for some semblance of maternal honesty, she merely let out an annoyed sigh. "Sweetheart, you're just imagining things. You know your father and I love you both exactly the same. But actions never lie." A few months before the college decision, I happened upon my mother's unlocked phone sitting on the kitchen counter. An open text thread with my Aunt Linda caught my eye, and though I knew I shouldn't look, my eyes scanned the screen. "I feel somewhat bad for poor Francis," my mother had typed to her sister. "But Harold is completely right. She just doesn't stand out or possess Victoria's sparkle. We have to be practical about where our money goes." I quietly set the phone back down and walked away without uttering a word. That very night, sitting in the dark, I made a silent vow to myself. I didn't want petty revenge. I wanted absolute, unassailable independence. I opened my battered laptop, stared at the flickering, cracked screen, and typed a single query into the search bar: full rides and merit scholarships for independent students. I sat on my bedroom floor at 2 a.m., with a worn spiral notebook and a cheap scientific calculator, running the cold numbers over and over again. Eastbrook State, $25,000 per year. 4 years, $100,000 total. Parental contribution, 0. My personal savings from working part-time summer jobs, $2,300. The financial gap was terrifyingly vast. If I couldn't bridge it on my own, I faced 3 grim possibilities: drop out before setting foot on campus, drown in 6 figures of predatory student loan debt that would shackle my adult life for decades, or attend part-time over 7 or 8 exhausting years while working full-time. Every standard path led directly to the failure my father had predicted, becoming the bad investment, the twin who couldn't make it, the family disappointment. I could already hear the insufferable Thanksgiving conversations in my head. Victoria is doing so wonderfully at Whitmore. Francis. Oh, she's still trying to figure her life out. But this wasn't just about proving my parents wrong. It was about proving to myself that my existence possessed inherent value. I scoured scholarship databases until my eyes burned from the harsh glare of the monitor. Most opportunities required elaborate faculty recommendations, proof of family poverty, or had deadlines that had long since passed. Then, tucked deep within the university portal, I stumbled upon something extraordinary. Eastbrook State maintained a highly prestigious, hyper-competitive merit scholarship program specifically for independent, high-achieving students. It offered full tuition coverage, books, and a generous living stipend. The catch? Only 5 students out of thousands of applicants were selected each academic year. The competition was notoriously brutal. I saved the link immediately. As I kept searching, my eyes landed on a national award that seemed almost mythical, the Whitfield Scholarship. A complete full ride, a $10,000 annual living stipend, and a mandatory requirement that recipients at partner universities deliver the keynote commencement address at graduation. Only 20 students across the entire nation were chosen annually. I let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. 20 students in the whole country. What possible chance did a girl with a broken laptop have? But I bookmarked it anyway. I had two distinct choices: accept the diminished life my parents had assigned to me, or ruthlessly design my own. I chose the latter. To execute my plan, I needed a flawless, airtight strategy, and I needed it immediately. I filled an entire notebook that summer with meticulous operational schedules and financial calculations. Job number 1, early morning barista at the campus coffee shop from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., earning roughly $800 a month. Job number 2, weekend residence hall cleaning crew, bringing in another $400 a month. Job number 3, economics department teaching assistant, if I could perform well enough in my first semester classes to secure the role, adding $300 a month. Total projected monthly income, $1,500, or roughly $18,000 a year. That still left a $7,000 annual deficit for tuition, which meant I had to maintain a flawless 4.0 GPA to secure continuous merit grants. I secured the absolute cheapest off-campus housing available, a windowless, shoebox room in a dilapidated house shared with 4 other students for $300 a month. No parking, no air conditioning, zero privacy. It would have to suffice. My daily routine crystallized into an unrelenting, mechanical schedule: wake at 4 a.m., work the coffee shop shift by 5 a.m., attend back-to-back lectures from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., study or work TA duties until 10 p.m., and sleep from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night, repeated for 4 continuous years. The week before I departed for college, Victoria posted a series of glamorous photos from a luxury resort trip to Cancun with her wealthy high school friends, sunset beaches, designer outfits, endless laughter. I spent that exact same evening packing my thrift store comforter and second-hand clothes into a worn, borrowed suitcase. Our lives were already diverging drastically, and we hadn't even stepped foot onto our respective campuses yet. But every single night before I closed my eyes, I stared at the ceiling and repeated the exact same mental mantra: this is the non-negotiable price of absolute freedom. Freedom from their toxic expectations, freedom from their dismissal, and freedom from ever needing their validation again. Freshman year Thanksgiving arrived, and I sat completely alone in my tiny rented room, listening to the ambient sounds of my family's house through my cell phone receiver. I could hear the distant clink of fine china, boisterous laughter, and the warm, chaotic energy of a holiday celebration I had been deliberately excluded from. "Hello, Francis," my mother's voice sounded distant, distracted, and rushed over the line. "Hi, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving," I said softly, looking at the cup of instant noodles sitting on my desk. "Oh, yes. Happy Thanksgiving, honey. How are your classes going?" "I'm doing well. Is Dad around? Can I speak to him for a second?" A brief, awkward pause echoed over the line. Then, perfectly clear in the background, I heard my father's booming voice: "Tell her I'm far too busy right now." The words hit my chest like heavy stones. My mother's tone returned, artificially bright and superficial. "Your father is just right in the middle of carving the turkey, sweetheart. I don't need a single thing from you." "All right, well, we love you." "Love you too," I murmured, and hung up. I opened social media minutes later, and the very first post on my feed was a high-resolution photograph Victoria had just uploaded. My mother, my father, and Victoria were seated around a lavishly decorated dining table, candles glowing, a golden brown turkey in the center. The caption read, "So profoundly thankful for my amazing family." I zoomed in on the image. 3 elaborate place settings. 3 dining chairs. Not 4. They hadn't even bothered to set a symbolic place for me at the table. I sat on my bed for an hour, staring at that photograph. Something fundamental shifted permanently inside my soul that night. The deep, aching need for their love that I had carried since childhood didn't simply vanish, but it hollowed out completely. Where the crushing pain used to live, an absolute, icy clarity took its place. That emptiness granted me a weapon the pain never could, an unshakable, relentless focus. Second semester of my freshman year brought Microeconomics 101, with Drive Margaret Smith, a legendary, formidable professor at Eastbrook with a terrifying academic reputation. She had taught for 30 years, published in every major economic journal, and students widely rumored that she hadn't awarded an A grade in over 5 years. I sat in the front row every single lecture, took meticulous, exhaustive notes, and submitted my first major research paper expecting a B- at best. When the paper was returned, 2 bold red letters were stamped at the top, A. Directly beneath the grade was a handwritten note, "See me in my office immediately after class." My heart sank into my stomach, assuming I had inadvertently violated some obscure citation rule. After the lecture cleared out, I approached her desk nervously. Dr. Smith was packing her briefcase, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun, her sharp reading glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. "Frances Townsend," she stated, looking up. "Yes, Dr. Smith." "Sit down." I sat rigidly in the leather chair. She adjusted her glasses, examining my paper. "This research essay is quite simply one of the most brilliant pieces of undergraduate economic analysis I have read in 20 years. Where did you complete your high school preparation?" "Just a standard public high school. Nothing advanced." "And your parents? Are they academics or economists?" I hesitated, clutching my notebook tightly. "My parents do not support my education, Dr. Smith. Financially or otherwise." The raw truth spilled out before I could filter it. Dr. Smith slowly set her pen down, her stern expression softening into deep, analytical interest. "Tell me everything, Frances." So I did. For the very first time in my life, I laid out the entire unvarnished truth to an adult who actually listened: the psychological abandonment, the brutal financial dismissal, the 3 concurrent jobs, the 4 hours of sleep, and the relentless drive to survive. When I finally finished, Dr. Smith remained silent for a long moment, staring at me with profound respect. "Have you ever formally looked into applying for the Whitfield Scholarship, Frances?" she asked softly. "I've seen the portal," I replied, shaking my head. "But it's virtually impossible. Only 20 students across the entire nation win it." "Yes," Dr. Smith said, leaning forward across her desk, her eyes blazing with absolute conviction. 20 students nationwide. It offers a full ride, an annual living stipend, and the mandatory honor of delivering the keynote commencement address at graduation. Frances, you possess extraordinary, generational potential. But potential means absolutely nothing if you allow yourself to remain invisible. Let me help you be seen by the world. The next 2 years blurred into an obsessive, unrelenting crusade. I woke up at 4 a.m. every morning without exception. Coffee shop shift at 5 a.m. Lectures by 9 a.m. Economic research and TA grading until 6 p.m. Library study carol until midnight. Repeat. I deliberately skipped every single campus party, every football game, every social gathering, and every late-night outing. While other college students were building fun memories, I was building an indestructible 4.0 GPA across 6 consecutive semesters. There were brutal moments where my physical body almost completely gave out. During my sophomore year, I fainted flat on the floor during a morning shift at the coffee shop from sheer physical exhaustion and severe dehydration. The emergency room doctor ordered me to rest for a week. I was back behind the espresso machine 24 hours later. On another occasion, I sat inside my friend Rebecca's rusted sedan, which she had kindly lent me to travel to an off-campus academic conference, and sobbed uncontrollably for 20 minutes. Not because a single catastrophic event had occurred, but because the accumulated weight of surviving entirely on my own for years had temporarily overwhelmed my nervous system. But I refused to break. During the fall of my junior year, Dr. Smith called me into her office and placed a thick stack of formal paperwork on her desk. "I am officially nominating you as Eastbrook State's primary candidate for the Whitfield Scholarship, Frances." I stared at her in total disbelief. "You're truly serious?" 10 exhaustive essays, 3 rounds of intense panel interviews, and a comprehensive national background review, she warned me. "It will be the most intellectually demanding process you have ever attempted." She paused, offering me a warm, proud smile. "But you have already survived infinitely harder obstacles just to sit in this chair." The application process consumed 3 full months of my life, writing deep philosophical essays on economic resilience, enduring ruthless grilling by panels of university presidents over Zoom, and gathering formal academic references. Right in the middle of this high-stakes process, Victoria sent me a random text message, the first communication I had received from her in nearly 8 months. "Mom mentioned you haven't come home for Christmas in 2 years. That's honestly pretty sad and dramatic of you, TBH." I read the message, set my phone face down on my desk, and immediately returned to editing my 3rd Whitfield essay. The unvarnished truth was that I couldn't afford a plane ticket home, but even if I had millions in the bank, I had zero desire to step foot inside a house where I was treated like a ghost. That Christmas, I sat completely alone in my tiny 300 rental room, with a steaming cup of cheap instant noodles, and a small paper Christmas tree my friend Rebecca had folded for me out of scrap paper. No family, no expensive gifts, no passive-aggressive comments, and zero emotional drama. It was, without a doubt, the most profoundly peaceful holiday I had ever experienced in my 21 years of life. The life-changing email arrived at precisely 6:47 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday morning during the first week of my senior year. Subject line: Whitfield Foundation, National Finalist Selection Notification. My hands shook so violently that I nearly dropped my phone as I unlocked the screen. "Dear Miss Townsend," the letter began, "we are thrilled to inform you that out of over 2,000 national nominees, you have been officially selected as one of the 50 national finalists for the Whitfield Scholarship Class of 2025. The final selection round will consist of a mandatory, in-person interview panel at our national headquarters in New York City. 50 national finalists competing for 20 winning spots. I had a 40% mathematical chance if all variables were equal. But in my life, variables were never equal. The interview was scheduled for the upcoming Friday morning in Manhattan, 800 miles away from my campus. I opened my banking app with a knot in my stomach, $847 total balance. A last-minute round-trip bus or train ticket would devour hundreds, a cheap hotel would swallow the rest, and my monthly rent was due in less than 2 weeks. I was on the verge of collapsing into despair when Rebecca burst through my bedroom door. "Frankie, you look like you just saw a spirit. What happened?" I silently pointed at the open laptop screen. She read the email, let out an ear-splitting shriek, and grabbed my shoulders. "You are going to New York, Frances. End of discussion." "Rebecca, I literally can't afford the travel expenses. A Greyhound bus ticket is $53. She interrupted fiercely. "It leaves Thursday night at midnight and arrives in Manhattan at 5 a.m. Friday. I am paying for your ticket right now, and you are not arguing with me." She looked me dead in the eye with absolute conviction. "Frankie, this is your ultimate moment. You worked yourself to the bone for 4 years for this exact shot. You are not throwing it away because of a bus fare. So I took the overnight bus. 8 grueling hours sitting upright on a bumpy highway, arriving at the cold, cavernous Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan at 5 a.m., with a stiff neck, dark circles under my eyes, and wearing a tailored blazer I had purchased for $6 at a local thrift store. When I stepped into the hyper-luxurious waiting room at the Whitfield Foundation headquarters hours later, I was surrounded by polished, wealthy candidates from Ivy League institutions, wearing $1,000 designer suits, holding expensive leather portfolios, accompanied by wealthy parents offering final words of encouragement. I looked down at my second-hand outfit and my scuffed shoes, feeling a sudden, terrifying wave of imposter syndrome wash over me. I don't belong in a room like this, I thought frantically. But then Dr. Smith's voice echoed clearly in my mind, "You don't need to belong to their world, Francis. You just need to show them that you possess the absolute right to conquer it." 2 weeks after that intense interview in New York City, I was walking along the sidewalk toward my morning shift at the coffee shop when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw an email notification with the subject line, "Whitfield Scholarship, Final Selection Decision." I froze dead in my tracks right on the pavement, causing a passing cyclist to swerve around me with a loud shout. I didn't even hear him. My thumb was trembling so violently that it took me 3 attempts just to tap the notification and open the message. "Dear Miss Townsend," the formal letter read, "we are immensely proud to inform you that you have been officially selected as a Whitfield Scholar for the class of 2025. I read those 2 lines once, twice, 3 times, and then a 4th time, just to make sure my exhausted mind wasn't playing a cruel trick on me. Then, right there on the dirty concrete curb outside the morning grind, my knees simply gave out, and I sat down and sobbed. They were not quiet, polite tears, they were deep, heaving sobs of pure, unadulterated relief that caused complete strangers to stop and stare at me. 4 years of brutal physical exhaustion, bone-deep isolation, financial terror, and relentless determination came pouring out of my chest on that sidewalk. I was an official Whitfield Scholar, a national winner entitled to full tuition, a $10,000 annual living stipend, and the absolute legal right to transfer to any premier partner university within their national network to complete my final year. Later that afternoon, Dr. Margaret Smith called me directly into her office to celebrate the extraordinary news. "Francis, I just received the official confirmation from the National Foundation Board," she said, her voice rich with an overwhelming sense of maternal pride. "I have never been prouder of a student in my entire 30-year academic career. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would, Dr. Smith," I whispered, fighting back tears. "There is one additional, crucial detail you need to consider, Francis," Dr. Smith continued, leaning forward across her desk with a sharp, knowing look in her eyes. "The Whitfield Foundation allows its national scholars to transfer seamlessly to any partner institution for their final undergraduate year. Whitmore University, the very school your twin sister attends, happens to be at the absolute top of their partner network list." My breath caught in my throat as the sheer magnitude of her words registered in my mind. "If you exercise your transfer right to Whitmore," Dr. Smith explained smoothly, "you will enter their senior class with the highest cumulative GPA in the entire university. You will graduate as the undisputed valedictorian of Whitmore's class of 2025, and as the designated Whitfield Scholar, you will be legally mandated to deliver the keynote commencement address to the entire graduating class and their assembled families." I sat in absolute silence for a long moment, processing the stunning twist of fate that had just opened up before me. "I want to be completely clear, Dr. Smith," I said softly, looking her straight in the eye. "I am not making this choice out of petty malice, or a desire for childish revenge." "I know you aren't, Francis," Dr. Smith replied gently. "You are making this choice because Whitmore possesses a far superior economics research program for your future career goals. But if your biological parents just so happen to be sitting in the front row of that stadium expecting to celebrate Victoria, only to watch you take the podium, well, that is simply the universe balancing its own ledger. I made my final decision that very evening, executing the official transfer paperwork with the foundation, and I made a solemn vow to tell absolutely no one in my biological family. 3 weeks into my final semester at Whitmore University, the inevitable collision finally occurred. I was sitting in a secluded study carrel on the 3rd floor of the main campus library, deeply absorbed in an advanced econometrics textbook, when a sharp, familiar voice broke the quiet atmosphere. "Oh my absolute God! Francis!" I slowly looked up from my notes. Victoria was standing 3 feet away from my desk, holding a half-empty iced latte in her manicured hand, her mouth hanging open in complete, unvarnished shock. What are you doing here? How are you even standing in this library?" she stammered, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. I calmly closed my textbook, smoothed down my sweater, and looked at her. "Hello, Victoria. Do you actually go to school here?" she gasped, staring at me as if I were a ghost that had materialized out of thin air. "Since when? Mom and Dad never mentioned a single word about you going to Whitmore." "Mom and Dad don't know," I stated flatly, keeping my tone entirely void of emotion. "What do you mean they don't know?" she whispered loudly. "How could they possibly not know you are attending an expensive private university?" "They don't know because I haven't spoken a single word to them in years, Victoria. They don't know because they never cared enough to ask where I was." Victoria set her iced coffee down on a nearby table, her sharp eyes scanning my face, my notes, and my quiet composure with a mix of deep confusion, disbelief, and something that closely resembled shame. But how are you paying for this?" she stammered, her voice cracking. "Whitmore costs $65,000 a year. Mom and Dad said you couldn't afford a real college." "I paid for it myself," I replied serenely. "I worked 3 jobs, earned a 4.0 GPA, and won a national full-ride scholarship. I don't owe Mom and Dad a single penny." The word scholarship seemed to hang heavily in the air between us like a physical wall. Victoria looked down at her feet, avoiding my eyes. "Why didn't you ever reach out to us, Francis?" she asked softly. I gathered my books, stood up from my chair, and looked my twin sister dead in the eyes. "Did you ever once reach out to me, Victoria? Did you ever pick up the phone during the last 4 years to ask if I had enough money for food or textbooks?" She opened her mouth to offer an excuse, closed it, and stood completely silent. "I have to get to my afternoon lecture," I said quietly, pulling my bag onto my shoulder. "Francis, wait," she called out, reaching out to grab my sleeve. Do you genuinely hate us? The family?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, and then looked up at her face. "No, Victoria," I said with complete, icy honesty. "You cannot hate people that you have completely stopped caring about." I pulled my arm free from her grip, and walked away down the quiet library aisle. Victoria immediately called our parents the second she returned to her apartment that afternoon. I know this because she recounted the chaotic phone call to me months later, when the dust had finally settled. According to Victoria, she burst through her front door and announced into her phone, "Francis is attending Whitmore. She has been enrolled on campus since September." An absolute, suffocating silence had descended over the line for 10 full seconds before my father's voice boomed out in complete denial. "That is physically impossible, Victoria. She doesn't possess the financial resources to pay for a school like Whitmore. She won a massive national scholarship, Dad." Victoria had shouted back. "She is taking senior economics classes right now." My father had gritted his teeth and replied, "I will handle this situation immediately." My father called my mobile phone the very next morning, the first time his specific phone number had illuminated my screen in over 3 long years. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the answer button. "Francis," his voice came through the speaker, tight, stern, and demanding. "We need to discuss this situation immediately." Discuss what, Dad? Victoria informed us that you transferred to Whitmore University without consulting your mother or me. Why would you make such a massive decision behind our backs? I didn't make a decision behind your back, Dad, I replied, my voice completely flat and unbothered. I simply made a decision without you. I didn't think you would care, considering my education was a bad financial investment. A heavy, uncomfortable silence echoed over the line. Of course we care. He snapped, his authority clearly slipping. You are still my daughter. Am I? I asked softly. Because 4 years ago, sitting in your living room, you looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't special, that there was zero return on investment with me, and that I should figure out my life on my own. Do you remember saying those exact words to me, Dad? My father let out a harsh, frustrated breath. Francis, that conversation occurred 4 years ago in a completely different context. You are bringing up ancient history. It isn't ancient history to the girl who had to sleep 4 hours a night and clean dorm bathrooms just to pay for her textbooks, I corrected him cleanly. Francis, listen to me, he said, adjusting his tone into a calculated attempt at parental diplomacy. Your mother and I are traveling up to Whitmore in 3 weeks for Victoria's graduation ceremony. We will sit down as a family at a restaurant, discuss this entire situation like adults, and fix this rift. I will see you at the graduation ceremony, Dad, I stated simply. Francis, wait. I hung up the phone before he could finish his sentence, set my mobile device face down on my desk, and didn't bother calling back. The 3 weeks leading up to graduation day were a strange, surreal period of quiet anticipation. My biological parents arrived in town days early, booking an expensive hotel suite, reserving a private dining room at an upscale steakhouse, and ordering elaborate floral arrangements to celebrate Victoria's big moment. They were completely convinced that they were attending campus solely for Victoria. They had zero knowledge of my Whitfield Award. They had zero knowledge that I had been named the University Valedictorian, and they certainly had zero knowledge that I had been selected to deliver the keynote commencement address. My friend Rebecca drove up from my old campus to attend the ceremony as my personal guest, helping me select an elegant navy blue dress to wear beneath my graduation gown. You look like a formidable corporate CEO, Frankie, Rebecca gushed, adjusting my collar in the mirror. I feel like I am about to step into a gladiatorial arena, I admitted with a nervous laugh. Well, you brought the sword, the shield, and the law with you, she replied fiercely. Go out there and show them who you truly are. May 17, 2025. The sky over the Whitmore University Stadium was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The massive outdoor arena seated over 3,000 people, and by 9 a.m., the bleachers were packed to absolute capacity, with proud families holding colorful balloons, cameras, and massive bouquets of flowers. I arrived early through the private faculty entrance, stepping into the honored graduate staging area. My academic regalia was distinctly different from the standard black gowns worn by my peers. Draped across my shoulders was the vibrant gold silk sash designated exclusively for the University Valedictorian, and resting against my chest was the heavy bronze medallion of the Whitfield Scholar, catching the bright morning light. I took my assigned seat in the very front row of the elevated stage platform, reserved specifically for the university president, faculty deans, and official speakers. 20 feet away in the main graduate seating area on the field, Victoria was happily taking selfies with her sorority sisters, completely oblivious to my presence on the stage above her. And directly in the center of the stadium's front row VIP spectator section, in the absolute best seats in the entire venue, sat my biological parents. My father was wearing his finest navy suit, fiddling attentively with the expensive lens of his digital camera, aiming it toward the field to capture Victoria's big entrance. My mother sat beside him in a cream-colored designer dress, holding a massive bouquet of red roses in her lap, beaming with supreme pride. Sitting directly between them was an empty stadium chair, A chair they had casually reserved for their designer coats and purses. A chair that had never, ever been reserved for me. They looked so completely happy, so impeccably proud, and so thoroughly convinced of their family's perfection. They had absolutely no idea what was about to unfold. The university president stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone to quiet the roaring crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished faculty, honored guests, and members of the class of 2025. Welcome to Whitmore University's 125th commencement ceremony. The crowd erupted into loud cheers and applause. I sat perfectly still on the stage, my hands folded calmly in my lap, feeling my heart beat with a steady, unbreakable rhythm. The ceremony proceeded through its traditional academic milestones, formal greetings, faculty recognitions, and the conferral of honorary doctorates. Then, the university president returned to the center of the podium, his voice echoing powerfully through the stadium speakers. And now, it is my distinct privilege to introduce this year's university valedictorian and National Whitfield Scholar. A student who has demonstrated extraordinary academic brilliance, unprecedented personal resilience, and an unshakable strength of character. Please join me in welcoming Miss Frances Townsend. For one brief, suspended second, total silence hung over the 3,000 spectators. Then, I stood up from my seat on the stage. The entire stadium burst into loud applause as I walked steadily toward the podium, my heels clicking against the wooden platform, the gold valedictorian sash swaying with every step, the bronze Whitfield medallion gleaming brilliantly against my navy dress. And right there, in the dead center of the front row, I watched my parents' faces undergo a complete, catastrophic transformation. My father's hand froze instantly on his camera lens. My mother's massive bouquet of roses slipped out of her hands, spilling onto the concrete floor. The expression on their faces cycled through rapid, agonizing stages. First, total confusion as they looked at the gold sash, then, sudden, terrifying recognition, and finally, a pale, stricken, utter horror as the full reality of their 4-year lie crashed down upon their heads. Victoria's head whipped toward the stage from the field below, her jaw dropping in absolute, paralyzed shock as she mouthed my name, Frances. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone to my height, and looked out over the sea of 3,000 faces. In the front row, my parents sat completely frozen, staring up at me as if the universe had just opened a chasm beneath their feet. For the very first time in my 22 years of life, Richard and Harold Townsend were looking directly at me. They were not looking past me, they were not looking through me, and they were not focusing on Victoria. They were forced to look at me. I let the thunderous applause fade into absolute silence. Then, I leaned into the microphone, my voice echoing crystal clear across the entire stadium. Good morning, members of the faculty, proud parents, and my fellow graduates of the class of 2025. I paused, taking a slow, steady breath. 4 years ago, as I sat in a quiet room preparing for my future, I was explicitly told by the people I trusted most that I was not worth the financial investment. In the front row, my mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears instantly spilling over her eyes. My father's camera hung completely useless in his limp lap. I was told that I wasn't special, I continued, my voice firm, powerful, and utterly devoid of fear. I was told that there was zero return on investment with my life, and that I should simply figure it out on my own. So, I did. I worked 3 concurrent jobs, I slept 4 hours a night, I ate instant noodles in a windowless room, and I learned how to build my own foundation out of the dirt. I learned that my value as a human being is not determined by the size of a parent's checkbook, nor is it defined by whether or not the people who raised you possess the capacity to see your worth. To anyone sitting in this stadium today who has ever been told that they are not enough, that they are a bad investment, or that they don't belong at the table, I stand before you today as living proof that you are more than enough. You always have been. The entire stadium erupted into a deafening, standing ovation. 3,000 people rose to their feet, cheering, shouting, and clapping for a girl whose story had touched their souls. My mother was weeping hysterically in the front row, her face buried in her hands, while my father sat paralyzed in his chair, staring up at the podium like a man who had just realized he had traded pure gold for worthless dust. I stepped back from the microphone, offered a respectful nod to the university president, and walked off the stage with my head held high. The immediate aftermath in the post-graduation reception hall was an absolute masterpiece of poetic justice. As university deans, corporate recruiters, and distinguished alumni gathered around me to offer high-paying job offers and shake my hand, my parents desperately pushed their way through the crowd toward me. My father reached me first, his face pale, his voice raspy and broken. Francis, please. Why didn't you tell us you were the valedictorian? Why didn't you tell us about the Whitfield Award?" I calmly took a sip from my glass of water, looked him dead in the eyes, and asked the single question that destroyed his entire defense. "Did you ever once pick up the phone to ask me, Dad?" He opened his mouth to formulate a lie, but no words came out. My mother fell to her knees beside my gown, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for my forgiveness, pleading with me to come home for the summer so we could be a family again. I looked down at her with complete emotional detachment, feeling no burning rage, no desire for revenge, but holding an unbreakable sense of absolute self-respect. "I am not coming home, Mom," I stated calmly. "I have accepted an executive financial consulting position in New York City starting in 2 weeks. I built my own life without your money, without your approval, and without your validation. I am not angry at either of you anymore, because anger requires caring about your opinion. But I am officially choosing myself." I turned my back on their tears, took Rebecca's arm, and walked out of the stadium into the bright afternoon sunlight. In the years that followed, I built a magnificent, prosperous life in Manhattan, earning my MBA from Columbia University, launching a foundation to fund full-ride scholarships for independent students who had been abandoned by their families, and establishing a healthy, distant relationship with my sister Victoria on my own firm terms. My biological parents were forced to live with the permanent, public embarrassment of their failure, watching from afar as the daughter they had discarded as a bad investment transformed into the greatest success story of their lives. I had survived their darkness, conquered my own mountains, and finally proved to the entire world that the only investment that truly matters is the one you make in yourself.